views in this hugely green community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. All right, thank you for joining us on the program, and it's still Dialogue in Diaspora coming to you live from our North London studio. I'm joined now by Nana Ashanti. Nana Ashanti, a former mayor of Aro. Nana, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
And by Uma Kankia. Uma Kankia is a solicitor and a Labour council candidate, yeah?
Right. I was, yes, last year, yes. And hopefully next year as well.
All right, Uma, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let me start with you, Nana.
Yeah.
The election, everybody had written Jeremy Corbyn off, but suddenly he was able to pull off a very wonderful show.
Well, for some of us, we didn't write him off. The activists on the ground knew what Jeremy stood for. He was talking to the grassroots, to people who had been unheard, people who for a long time nobody seemed to be listening to. So we knew that Jeremy was offering something. And the mainstream media, unfortunately, were giving him a bad press. So they were the ones who were surprised. For those of us on the ground, his rallies were a reflection of the popularity of his message. So we weren't surprised.
Kankia, your solicitor, where are we now from legal angle?
Well, from a legal angle, obviously, we're in a hung parliament situation. So Theresa May has said that she's going to form a government. She has the 318 seats, I believe she has.
318.
Yeah, plus the Democratic Unionist Party that gives her the 328, which means she has the majority that she needs in order for government to pass any of its legislation that it needs to do. However, at the moment, we haven't got a formal pact, formal coalition as we do as we did in 2010. So the situation is that apparently the Conservatives are negotiating with the DUP around a confidence and supply motion, which means that they will vote on a case-by-case basis. So legally speaking, we will have a government of sorts. Whether that government will be fully functional, whether it will be able to operate in the way that it wants to operate is an entirely different question. And we won't really have much of an idea until next week when Parliament reopens on Monday and the Queen's speech is delivered by the government of the day, obviously the Conservatives, and then that needs to be debated in Parliament and they have to pass it with the majority. And if it doesn't pass, then we will start entering into a whole new world where potentially the opposition, if the government can't pass their agenda, the opposition could be asked to form a government if they're able to pass a motion.
Looking at the kind of relationship that the Conservatives are trying to build with the DUP, just in the last few days there has been this petition which has actually grown to about 718 million now, about against that relationship. For some, they feel a party that is against gay relationship, a party that is against abortion, women's rights, shouldn't be allowed to exercise any kingmakership role in the United Kingdom. But generally, on a legal perspective, should this be an issue?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, the DUP have 10 members of parliament, the Conservatives have 318. As we know, 326 is the majority that is needed for government to be able to pass its agenda for the day. Now, yes, people have got issues with the DUP because obviously they stand for a lot of different things and there's a lot of conflict between what they stand for and what some of the Conservatives stand for. But as the Conservatives have said, they are the closest party to them in terms of their ideals and ways forward. So that's why the DUP are the only party really that the Conservatives can work with to go forward with their legislative agenda.
At what cost do we know?
Well, this is what we're going to find out, because I think as we've read in the newspapers, I mean, Theresa May is being seen as a lame duck Prime Minister at the moment, because she is going to have to make a lot of concessions. She's going to have to appeal to her party, the backbenchers, a lot of people that she dismissed, a lot of people that she was hoping to get rid of if she had got the majority that she wanted. And coupled with that, she's going to have to bend in some ways to the will of the DUP, because there are going to be things that the DUP want that she may not necessarily agree with, but she's going to have to go along with it if she wants her legislative agenda to be passed. So we're living in very interesting times, because we haven't seen this since the 72, 73, I believe it was, or 74, 75 Labour-Liberal pact, where the last time we had a minority government in this kind of situation. And the DUP do hold a lot of the power. Is it right that they hold a lot of the power? I would argue that it's not. At the end of the day, there are a lot of issues still going on in Northern Ireland. For example, we don't have a fully functional Northern Irish Assembly at the moment, and people would say probably need to focus a little bit more on trying to get the power sharing agreement back into force with the DUP and Sinn Féin. But alongside of that, is it fair that 10 Northern Irish MPs are going to effectively hold the rest of the country over a barrel? I would say it's not, but we'll see how this plays out.
Jeremy has said he's ready to serve the country.
Yep.
He's ready to vote down the Queen's speech. Will he be able to do that? Will he have not the courage, the number to vote
the numbers,
Queen's
I'll say,
speech?
we all know that what the numbers are, 262 MPs, so it isn't the majority. However, even some of the Conservatives might not like what they see in the Queen's speech. So we're in territory, if people vote with integrity and they follow what they believe, as my brother has said, a lot of people are not very enamored of their relationship with the DUP. So if Conservative MPs, it can be a minority of them, and there are some who are very independent-minded, join with Labour, Lib Dem, the Green Party, and the SNP, they would vote down the government's Queen's speech.
But Jeremy Corbyn has always insisted that he's not ready to do any kind of deal with anybody.
This is not a deal. This is just the way Parliament works. If you like the sound of what somebody is saying and you vote with them, there's no deal, but you're going on what you've heard. And we know that there are some Conservatives also, because the number on the opposition benches is not enough. So they would need some to cross the floor as well. And that happens. That happens in Parliament. This is I think this is proper politics. It's come to the point where you don't just follow your party's line. If they are bringing out things you do not agree with, you have a duty to your constituents to say so.
Is it Jeremy Corbyn's stride now, is it not actually based on the fact that Theresa May was herself not kind of a very strong, stable leader, especially during the electioneering campaign? She kept
changing her mind,
many U-turns, and people felt, oh no, and that probably led to some of the high wave riding of Jeremy Corbyn. If the Conservative should bring up a proper, more stable candidate,
so. To be honest with you,
will those who voted Labour, those UKIP voters that switched back to Labour, would they not go back to say, okay, I think we can go back to...
It goes back to what I said in the beginning. For those of us who've been following Jeremy Corbyn since 2015, when he became leader of the Labour Party, he had his 10-point pledges. And these are the basis of the manifesto. The manifesto that Jeremy brought up, I call it Team Corbyn, because it wasn't Jeremy alone. It's a whole group of people who worked on this. It's a collective effort. The Labour Party is a collective party. It's not about one person. So what was put forward to the nation was a brilliant view of the kind of country we want to live in. It was about values and not about the person. The Conservative Party, unfortunately, believed its own hype, and believed that the so-called 20-point advantage they had would mean they would have a landslide. They were ignoring what was going on the ground, the grassroots movement, which was saying we want something different. We don't want the NHS sold. We don't want nurses to go to food banks. We don't want policemen to go to food banks. This is dreadful in the 6th richest nation in the country, in the world. Here we are having people not having enough money to live on. So it is those policies that I think will stand the test of time. You'll find that a lot of the UKIP voters were actually Labour voters, some of them. And that's another thing. There was a misunderstanding of what UKIP was. UKIP was about people who didn't like our relationship with Europe. And they were from all parties, from all walks of life, all ages. So Jeremy has actually captured the public imagination. And what people don't know, it's not just about young people. Yes, the youth vote was fantastic. I'm part of a Facebook group known as Over 50s for Corbyn. 50 plus who also support Corbyn. This is what I mean by his appeal is not just young people, it's not just old people, it's not just traditional Labour voters. It's right across the board. The problem we have, and the problem Jeremy has often, is that people say things like, oh, I like Labour, but I won't vote for Jeremy. Because I'll say what the mainstream press did was quite successful. They have to take out their propaganda against him was quite powerful. But when people meet him in person or hear him speak, and he got more exposure during the general election campaign, because by law you have to give all parties exposure. So people started to hear him for the first time. And it's not, for us, it's not surprising that the polls started shifting, because what he's advocating might not be in the neoliberal sense. It's really going back to Labour values. And a lot of people are excited by that.
Uma, I mean, as we are now on Parliament for sure, DUP propping up the Conservative, we are. Now, should the Prime Minister's Queen's speech be voted down, and Labour is unable to form a government, unable to summon enough people to present a speech that will be supported, so maybe voted down the Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May's speech and his own to voted down? What happens? Where are we? What happens?
I think, in theory,
An election?
the Conservatives are the largest party. They won the most seats in this election. They have 318 seats. However, if you add up the popular vote, they were not the most popular party when you include Labour, Liberal Democrats, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, and the Independents. The Progressive Alliance, as it's known, and the Greens are the ones that have got the most votes in the country. So therefore, if the Queen's speech is voted down next week, I think Jeremy Corbyn and the Progressive Alliance should be given an opportunity to try and form a government. And the reason for that is because they've set out a very clear, especially the Labour Party, have set out a very clear, fully costed legislative agenda for the next 5 years, and making society a lot more fairer, getting rid of
But where Jeremy himself is unable to have the full support of the Progressive Alliance,
then we'll have to have a general election.
That's the way it works.
Are people in the mood for a general election?
I don't.
I mean,
we've had 3 elections in the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
We've had the 2015 election. We had the referendum last year. We've now had another general election,
which we didn't need to have.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things I've been saying quite publicly is I think we probably are going to end up having another general election before too long. I'm predicting probably by November, because I don't see how this coalition between the Conservatives and the DUP is going to survive very long. I mean, you've got Theresa May is trying to push an agenda of hard Brexit. That's going to need to change now. The DUP want a softer Brexit. So where are they going to meet in the middle in order for that to be achieved? There are the differences that we identified earlier on between the views that they hold and the views that the Conservatives hold. Then you have the other issue of Conservative MPs who were shouted down, voted down by Theresa May. She tried to ostracise them. I mean, it's a well-known fact that had she won a majority, she was going to get rid of Philip Hammond. She was going to get rid of David Davis. She was going to get rid of Boris Johnson. Then you have people that she's had to bring back into the fold. Yesterday, Michael Gove was made Environmental Secretary. She wants, she hates him. Then you've got Nicky Morgan. Anna Soubry has been out on television speaking her down. So already, that's 6 people I've identified, let alone, these are 6 prominent people, let alone people that are on the back benches who haven't said anything. So if she cannot win these people around, then we are going to see a situation where we will have another general election. Is the public in the mood to have another general election? The answer would be no, because I think, this election, as my sister said, was not necessary. She already had a 17 Member of Parliament majority. They could have pushed their legislative agenda. She believed the hype that was being presented by the mainstream media, which was You're 20 points ahead in the opinion polls. Let's have a snap election. Let's obliterate the Labour Party. Exactly. What she failed to understand was that the Labour Party had a movement that was underground that suddenly came to the fore. Whenever the mainstream media would put one side of the argument out there, social media would come back with more facts, more figures, and people were saying no. I mean, young people have been mobilised. I think the rumours are that something like 72% of 18 to 25-year-olds voted in this general election. Why is that? They were inspired by the message that was being presented by Jeremy Corbyn. People across the spectrum are fed up with austerity. People are fed up with the lack of investment in the police forces, the lack of investment in the NHS. Absolutely. As somebody who works in the legal world, I'm fed up of seeing continuous cuts to legal aid. I'm a mental health specialist. I'm fed up of seeing cuts to mental health services and seeing more and more people suffering on a day-to-day basis because they're coming into hospital, they're being sectioned, they're not getting the right level of support that they need after they've been in hospital, and they keep going back in this cycle. So Labour offered in their manifesto an alternative and said this is what life could be like under a Labour government. People are saying, you know, the magic money tree, whatever, you know, all sorts of phrases that were being thrown out.
What's funny, you know, when you say the money tree on social media, exactly what you're saying. Somebody brought out a tree and with a basket of fruit, and this tree, every single fruit on the tree, they told you what exactly. So the thing is, it's captured people's imagination. What they're telling you is, if you're talking about corporation tax, it's going to give us so many billion. This is going to give this. So the promises that Labour has made are promises that can be met. It is being costed, as you said. Yeah. So it is not a pipe dream. If you really want an alternative to what we're getting, like austerity and cuts, you want more housing, you want free university tuition for your kids, because why are children coming out of university with 40,000 debts? It's not sustainable.
But that goes across the world, even in most developed countries in America.
Oh, America is no example. America is an austere country. Go to Scotland, even our country, Scotland. University students don't pay fees. It's a value system. You can choose to have people come up with debt, and you can think that it's a market economy, or you can choose to say, actually, these people are citizens, we're investing in them. Because when we invest in them, we're investing in our nation. If you give bursaries to nurses, we have nurses coming to work in our hospitals without the burden of debt. So, to be honest, a different way of looking at the world. And if you go to Sweden, you go to other European countries, things like that are happening. You look at the railways. It's interesting that we are privatizing our railways and foreign governments are buying our railways, whether it's Germany, France, the Hong Kong government. So why is it that we think that is acceptable? So this is just a different way of looking at the world. And to me, America is no example. You can look at other nations.
As Jeremy Corbyn changed the political terrain of Britain.
Of course.
He has. It's irrevocable. It's not going back. I think people have woken up and realized that the things we thought would never happen. You know, when people said he was unelectable, they were just repeating the mantra that, oh, no, you have to win in the middle, the so-called middle, which is the right. And actually, he said, no, I challenge that. We can have another world. Another world is possible. We can do things differently. We can invest in people. We can care about people. What I find interesting as a Christian is that he echoes Christian messages. Because when he says we will not pass by on the other side, for me, it's reminiscent of the Good Samaritan. If you notice in that story, people were walking by on the other side, and only the Samaritan stopped. So what he's saying is that Labour will not walk on the other side. We are with people. We're going to do things differently. And that I find for me, is very exciting.
Umar, what has changed in the last few years that the Conservative government has been in power, that people suddenly feel like, you know, we can't have this anymore?
I think the measure of austerity. I mean, we've been in austerity for the last 7 years now, and I think it feels the Conservatives in 2010 said we'll be out of austerity by, I think it was 2015. 2015 came. We're still in austerity. Unfortunately, Labour Party at the time didn't really have our act together, so therefore, you know, Ed Miliband wasn't able to get himself elected. 2 years later, it continues, and I think it's now hitting people a lot more harder because you're seeing, when you're seeing nurses are having to go to food banks, when you're seeing the cuts to police services, when you're seeing cuts across the board, and people are wondering, hang on, my salary hasn't gone up. It may have gone up, but not in real terms.
1%?
In 7 years. These measures that you're taking, they're having a negative impact. They're continuing to have a negative impact on my life, my family's life. What can we do to change this? And I think the Labour narrative has changed. I mean, and I think, in the last, I think in 2015, Labour was offering austerity light, and I think people chose to go with the devil you know rather than one you don't. Whereas this time around, I think for the first time in a very long time, we had a very clear alternative. So it was like, you can continue with austerity, or here is a package that we're able to offer. This is where the money is coming from. This is how we're going to invest it. Let's bring everybody up together. Let's invest in our young people. If we invest in our young people, they will be the workers of tomorrow. They will be the ones that are putting back into our economy. They will be the ones that will help to fuel our economy. So things like that, people stood up and started to listen a lot more. And I think that was absolutely key as to why the Labour Party did so well. Yes, I would have loved to have seen a Labour majority, and I think, as John McDonnell put it yesterday, if we had a few more weeks of campaigning to go within this election, I think we probably would have seen a Labour government. And a lot of people came on board quite late. I'll hold my hands up and say I wasn't a fan of Jeremy Corbyn a couple of years ago. I'm quite open about that. But listening to the message, listening to the movement, getting involved, understanding what the issues were, it spoke to the reasons as to why I became a Labour Party member in the first place. I'm a solicitor. I work with the most vulnerable in society, and I do that because I'm passionate about making sure that people's voices are heard. And I think that's exactly what the Labour Party has done in this election, is making sure that the people, as the slogan goes, they're for the many, not the few. So, those that are at the very top, we're saying, okay, you pay a little bit extra, fine, but everyone's going to benefit. Not just you at the top, everyone in society is going to benefit. Surely we want to be living in a country which is fair. Surely we want to be living in a country where, poverty isn't an issue that we're talking about on a day-to-day basis. We shouldn't have a situation where people that are on the front line, nurses, doctors, are having to use food banks. We shouldn't be in a situation where security is an issue because we've cut the police forces by over 20,000 in such a short space of time. So Labour has offered that alternative. And if this coalition of chaos, which is ironic because this is a term that the Conservatives were using to describe what would happen under a Labour government, but actually we're seeing potentially this is what's going to happen with them at the DUP. If this fails, then hopefully the public will see that there is a real alternative, and whether that's a case of Jeremy Corbyn being invited as leader of the opposition to form a government, or there is another general election that is called, hopefully we'll be able to see that the Labour Party can push forward.
Talking legally now, how would you describe the role of the press in the run-up to this election?
I think the press played a very negative role in this election, and I think God bless social media, because I think people were able to get the Labour message out in very different ways. Because if you picked up a newspaper, if you watched the TV, you would think that the Labour Party were the devil incarnate with the way that they were being described, and I think that's completely unacceptable. And I think there is definitely something to be said about the way press handle themselves in the future when it comes to these types of matters.
As a solicitor, is it possible a kind of regulation to make press independent, politically independent?
Well, I mean, the regulation is there. It just needs to be enforced. I think that was the issue, because I think a lot of the mainstream media had a certain narrative throughout the election, and the regulations are there.
I mean, there are probably no regulations saying you cannot endorse a particular political party and openly support.
But I don't think the problem is in the endorsement. It's in the very
because if you endorse a political party,
you don't have to tell lies about somebody else.
Then of course you do everything. You use your medium to
that's
bring
where
down the other party, isn't it?
No, because I think that's what my brother is saying about regulation. The regulation is there. You have a duty to report fairly. It's part of the regulation. But what they do is that they cross the line into, you can be partisan. The Morning Star is pro-Labour. But you don't go into the other thing of inventing stories and saying things. For example, the whole IRA story. First of all, 30 years ago, but it's also misrepresenting history. The fact that you are talking to Jerry Adams and having tea with him when the government is also talking to Jerry Adams doesn't make you a terrorist sympathizer. So it's that kind of narrative. And they were putting out a story which was untrue. And it's about that. And I think Levinson too needs to be enforced, because that was about how the press behaves. And often when you, even the BBC, that paragon of reporting, the World Service has been popular around the world. The way in which they were reporting about the election was unacceptable. In fact, the BBC Trust itself came up against Laura Kuenssberg. That she asked a question and used the answer to another question in the clip that she put in to the people. So the press, a free press is wonderful. And none of us are saying we shouldn't have a free press. And a press can be partisan. We all have opinions. And in fact, the most interesting programs are where people have very firm opinions, because you can disagree with them and all that, but you can have a debate. What is not acceptable is misrepresentation. And that is what a lot of them, to me, have done. And I'm sure my brother can add to it in terms of the legal...
I mean, if you take a look at the role of the press, in between themselves, the Sun and other right-wing press, they control maybe about minimum of about 2 million. In fact, the evening newspaper alone has about 1 million readers per day. But it does seem the people picked up these papers, read through, or they read through, and they said, oh, and they chunked them.
But you know,
aside.
some people actually bought the Sun and put it in the bin. Some people actually went to they went to shops, bought the whole stack of the Sun, and just put it in the bin. And some people burnt it because they felt that the paper, and it's funny that people power is important, consumer power is important. What they were saying is, what you're printing, we don't like it, it's not right. So for people to even put money in their pocket to get rid of it, because the coverage on the front pages, nasty.
And I think that's where social media played a very important role in this election as well, because I think people were able to, yes, I think for a certain demographic in the population, people still consume news through, traditionally going to a newsagent, picking up a newspaper and reading the paper. A lot of people consume their news through, Google alerts or news alerts that are coming through on their phones. So people that would go to rallies, for example, for Jeremy Corbyn, it wasn't widely reported in the press, but you would see a huge presence of it online, because people are sharing videos of them being there, people are sharing articles. So I think that helped to create a bit more of a balanced view of the election itself. The mainstream media, yes, I think they do need to have a period of reflection, have a look at what's happened, have a look at how they reported things, and maybe look at how they're going to do things in the future. Regulations are there. I too am a firm believer of free press, because I think we don't want to get into a situation where the press is overly regulated, because then it will go one way or the other. But I think social media is there, and I think people generally are able to consume news in many different forms, in many different ways. And I think that's the beauty of social media, that's the beauty of the internet, because you don't have to just believe what is said on the front page of the Daily Mail or the Sun. You can fact check, you can look at it from another perspective. And I think that's what brought a lot of people out this time around for these elections, because I think people were seeing one thing on the news or in the media and saying, well, hang on, this sounds a bit funny, maybe let me have a look at a website or read another article to get a more balanced view. And people were able to weigh up things in their mind and decide which way they wanted to go. And I think part of that was underestimated, I think, by the Conservatives, because I think they felt that the mainstream media was backing them all the way, which was true, because apart from the Daily Mirror and the Guardian, who came on quite late, everyone else pretty much was backing the Conservatives to win this election. But speaking to people that I know who are activists, people who campaign, even I know a few of the new MPs that have been elected, they weren't relying on the media to get their message across. They were relying on the traditional door knock, getting out there, holding rallies, holding events, speaking to people on the ground, because that's where it matters. That's the only way you're going to understand what people are thinking, what people are feeling, how, what people's views are on certain issues. And I think that's the key thing.
What, Nana, what went wrong in Scotland?
I think Scotland again. I think it goes back to how we consume news.
If the Conservative had not won,
the reality is
we'll
Scotland.
probably be talking about Prime Minister Jeremy Corbyn now.
Yeah, but Scotland went from being a mainly Labour stronghold to an SNP stronghold, because for a long time Labour had taken Scotland for granted. Yeah. Labour was not listening. Scotland has traditionally been more left-wing than the rest of the country. So what happened in 2015 was a backlash to years of not listening to the people. Having had that, in a sense, the SNP had been the biggest party, and still are, and it was a kind of recalibration. The Conservatives also have a very interesting leader. Ruth Davidson is popular. She has a nice manner of speaking. And in Scotland, we still have a Blairite. I would say we have red Tories as Labour. You can see I'm very on the left. So if you're not offering the people that clear, although Jeremy Corbyn is offering the clear program, Scotland is an independent nation in that sense. Or I would say it's self-determining. So the Scottish Labour Party is a lord unto itself, and what they are offering is certainly not popular. They need to rethink it. They were anti-Corbyn as well. And I think for the whole of the Labour movement, people need to now look at it again, that this idea that neoliberalism is the way forward, that the so-called centrists are right, they need to reconsider, because they were not giving a message that Scotland got behind. And I think with the SNP being in government and also implementing some of the cuts, austerity and things like that, they also got hit for that. They've been doing some good things like free tuition fees.
The issue of the second referendum was the real major problem.
I think
it wasn't the mood.
But it's also austerity in the Scottish government. Stormont is implementing austerity, because at the end of the day, if the money is less, you've chosen to give free tuition fees, but there are other things.
But then if it's an issue of austerity program, now going to the Conservative, that is being said to execute more of austerity program will not be a better option for the Scottish.
No, the funny thing about the electorate, sometimes the way in which people make decisions is very interesting. They are still not happy with Labour. That's what I started with. Labour is the natural home of the Scots. But because they are not happy with Labour, the only way for them to get rid of the SNP is to vote Conservative. It might seem a roundabout thing, but that's what was happening in Scotland. Labour has not done enough to win them back, and they don't want to just give their vote to Labour. So yes, they've gone to Conservatives, who they don't really like anyway. So if there is another election, if we don't get a Corbyn premiership, if the Conservatives fail to carry their Queen's speech, we will have to have a general election. And it is up to Scottish Labour to now start talking to the people and not just assume that they can have the vote. And in fact, for a lot of people who didn't vote for a long time, it was this assumption that, oh, these people have nowhere to go, they'll vote Labour. People stayed at home. Jeremy's campaign has galvanized people. They've come out to vote.
Okay. All right, Umar, as we come down to the end of this program, what should we be looking out for in a couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of months?
Well, I think probably in the next few hours, I think we're probably looking at what happens with the Conservatives in terms of the 1922 committee that will be meeting this morning.
But they are not in the mood for a change of leadership.
No, they're not in the mood for a change of leadership. However, I think what will be key is what happens next week with the Queen's speech. I think that
in all fairness, the chances of the Queen's speech scaling through is very high.
I don't think it's as high as people might think, because although the Conservatives are not in a mood for a leadership election or another,
so they are likely to still back.
Let's not forget, it's the DUP that hold all the cards here, because they have to convince. Theresa May has to convince not only the 317 MPs that she has under her control, under her leadership, she also has to have the backing of the 10 members of the DUP. Now, if there are any things which they don't agree on, if there are any differences, that 10 is gone, which means that the other side.
She would do anything to compromise, don't you think so?
Well, she might do anything to compromise herself, but then is that...
And they will not be asking for too much. DUP are not likely to be asking for too much.
Well, they'll probably look to have some more investment being made in Northern Ireland.
Probably that's it.
No, well, they've got a softer Brexit stance, so...
She will change her mind?
Well, will she? Because, don't forget, there's a huge Eurosceptic wing in her party. If she goes too far to the left in terms of Brexit, then the
Conservatives will not back her, so she'll still lose the majority. That's where the danger is. The Queen's Speech is a real dangerous time for her. Because if she goes too much to what, as you just said, the DUP wants, she will lose the Eurosceptics who will vote against it. So, you know, it's a balancing act which I don't envy her.
Interesting time ahead. From very strong, stable leadership to what do we have now?
Coalition of chaos.
You guys said, I didn't say that. All right. So far we can go to the program. Umar Kankia, thank you so much for taking your time out of job today. For joining us on the program. We look forward to having you one more time.
Thank you.
All right. Nana Asante, former Mayor Aro, thank you for taking your time out to join us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And so far we can go on the program today. It's been a pleasure to have you join us on the show. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. Results of the election and their opinions about Prime Minister Theresa May.
Election results are